All right, let's dive into a situation brewing in Chicago. We've got a local figure who went on national TV with some really sharp criticism of the mayor.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're looking at that intersection, where local problems meet national politics.
Exactly, and it's all through the lens of one specific interview.
Right. Our source for this deep dive is an interview from Fox News featuring Kata Truss. She's the Chicago Director for Community Roundtable. And, well, she definitely had a distinct and pretty critical take on Mayor Brandon Johnson.
Okay, so our goal today, just to be clear, is to really unpack the arguments and the specific examples Ms. Truss used in that interview. We want to understand her criticisms about the mayor's focus, her view on the state of the city.
Based just on what she said there.
Precisely. We're not here to debate if she's right or wrong, but to see what points she thought were important enough to bring up. What insights can you draw from her perspective?
Yeah, it's like she opened a window onto the situation, and we're looking through it to see what she pointed out.
So where did she kick things off in the interview? What was her first main point?
Well, she jumped right in reacting to comments Mayor Johnson made about former President Trump. Her take basically was that this was a deliberate distraction.
A distraction. How so?
She suggested he's trying to shift focus away from his own problems here in Chicago. Kind of implied he's maybe campaigning, needs other topics because, well, she claimed his approval ratings are low.
Okay. So pointing fingers nationally to avoid local heat, in her view.
That's the idea she presented. And she didn't just leave it there. She immediately pivoted to budget numbers, big ones.
Right, the deficits. She felt he should be talking about those instead.
Exactly. She listed quite a few. Let's see. She mentioned a city deficit of $988 million, almost $1 billion.
Wow.
Then the RTA, the Regional Transportation Authority, $770 million deficit cited there. Chicago Public Schools, $550 million. And the CTA, the Transit Authority, over $500 million.
Okay, so that's the city itself, regional transport, schools, city transit. That's a broad picture of financial strain she's painting.
Definitely. It hits a lot of critical areas. Her argument, as presented, was crystal clear. With these kinds of numbers, why is the mayor talking about Trump?
It's a strong rhetorical question, framing it as a misplacement of focus.
Yeah, she even used that line, he has 99 problems and President Trump is not one of them, linking it back to her idea about his approval ratings.
Got it. Okay, so finances were point one. What about public safety? That's always a huge issue in Chicago discussions.
For sure, and she spent a good chunk of time on it. She directly contrasted her view with what the source quoting Mayor Johnson is saying.
And what was his stated position, according to the source?
That his administration's investments are clearly having some strong returns as violence continues to go down, and his big goal is the safest, most affordable big city.
Okay. Standard mayoral reassurance, perhaps?
Yeah.
How did Ms. Truss respond to that in the interview?
She painted a very different scene, said it was tough to find evidence of those returns. Her words were, crime is still up, it's running rampant.
But did she acknowledge the mayor's point about violence going down at all? Sometimes the stats do show decreases.
She did, actually. There was a nuance there. She mentioned that, according to the mayor and state officials, crime is down a little bit from last year.
Right.
But she basically dismissed it, said something like, it's not down nearly enough for anyone to be bragging about how crime is not happening here. So it's like, yeah, maybe a tiny dip, but the reality on the ground feels unchanged or still terrible from her perspective.
And she backed that feeling up with something personal, didn't she?
She did. A really powerful moment in the interview. She shared that her own husband was carjacked. Right in front of their house.
Wow.
And the detail she added was that they lived just 3 blocks from Mayor Johnson's house.
Oof. That certainly makes the issue feel less abstract. It's a direct counter-narrative to official pronouncements of safety.
Absolutely. It brings it right in the doorstep, literally. And the interview also threw in a specific headline. Fox 32 Chicago. It was about Memorial Day weekend. 24 shot, 3 killed. That seems to have been included to bolster her point that, despite any claims of reduction, serious violence is still a major ongoing problem.
Underlining her argument about the reality versus the rhetoric.
Right. And she connected this whole crime perception issue to the city's economy, too.
How so?
Mentioned that big companies were finding it hard to get people to move to Chicago or even stay because of safety concerns, and that this was actually causing some businesses to leave the city.
So in her view, crime isn't just a social issue, it's the direct hit to the city's economic health and reputation.
Exactly. It links public safety, business climate, city finances. It's all intertwined in her critique.
Okay, let's shift to maybe the most politically charged part of the interview, Mayor Johnson's comments comparing the Trump administration to Nazi Germany.
Yeah, that was definitely a focal point. The source mentioned his specific claim about actions against working people, erasing black folks from museums and the history and the culture.
A very strong comparison. How did Ms. Truss react to that specific point in the interview?
Well, her reaction was quite interesting, actually. It was nuanced. She started by saying she does have issues with some moves being made to eliminate how blacks are displayed in history.
So she acknowledged the underlying concern about black history representation.
It seems so, based on those comments. She indicated that part resonated, but, and this was a quick pivot, she immediately shifted the responsibility.
Responsibility to whom?
To black people themselves. She said something like, it's the responsibility of black people to cultivate their own history. It's nobody else's, and we have to do that ourselves.
Okay, so her argument was essentially, yes, there might be issues with how history is presented, but don't put the onus on the president or the country to fix it. That's our job.
That seems to be the core of her response on that specific point, and this led her to a broader piece of advice.
Which was?
Don't fall for the okie-doke.
Don't fall for the okie-doke. What did she mean by that in context?
In the context of this interview, it really sounded like a call to ignore the daily political noise, the back and forth, the what's happening today stuff, as she put it.
And focus instead on?
On the local issues she felt were being ignored. She specifically used the term disinvestment in the people here, pointing the finger at Mayor Johnson and other officials.
Okay, so linking back to her earlier points about budget priorities and local needs.
Precisely. Which flows right into her comments about the migrant situation in Chicago.
Right. How did she frame that issue?
She focused heavily on resource allocation. According to our points in the interview, the city spent nearly $1 million just setting up housing and support for newcomers, her term for the migrants.
Almost $1 million. Did she give a sense of the numbers involved? How many people?
Yeah, she mentioned 52,000 people arriving, and her main criticism here was the timing, essentially. That this huge influx happened when, in her view, the city couldn't afford to care for the people already here.
So an argument about capacity and priorities again.
Very much so. And she was quite direct about the mayor's role. She felt he could have, at any point, said, enough, we have too many, but didn't.
And she characterized that decision how?
As not using common sense. She went a bit further, actually, stating her opinion that this mayor does not use common sense very often. That was her assessment.
Strong words.
Yeah.
Did she mention any specific impacts beyond the financial cost, like on the ground?
Yes, she did. The interview included examples she brought up, like using abandoned school buildings to house migrants.
Okay.
And also parks being taken over, she said, so much that kids couldn't even play soccer there anymore. These were presented as sort of tangible, visible results of the policy from her perspective.
Got it. Concrete examples to illustrate her broader point about resource strain.
Right. And then she wrapped up the interview with a point about education that was, well, pretty staggering.
What was that?
She cited this statistic, 20 high schools in Chicago where apparently not a single student can read or perform math at grade level.
20 high schoolers. Not one student at grade level in reading or math.
That was the figure she presented. It's a really shocking number.
And she used that to challenge the mayor directly.
Oh, absolutely. She specifically brought up his background as an educator, referred to him as our little teacher, who is now the mayor, and basically said, deal with that. It landed like a final, very sharp critique, aiming right at his perceived area of expertise and his core responsibilities as mayor, according to this interview.
Wow. Okay, so that really covers the main points from this one specific critical interview with Truss, a really wide range of criticisms.
Yeah, from those huge budget deficits and her disputes over crime stats.
To the controversial Nazi Germany comparison, the spending on migrants versus existing needs, and ending with that really stark educational statistic.
And again, just to reiterate for you listening, our goal here was simply to lay out the arguments and the specific examples as they came up in that source material.
Exactly, giving you a clear snapshot of the points raised by this particular critical voice in Chicago. It really shows just how complex things are.
It does. You see how city finances, public safety, migration, education, they aren't separate boxes. They all interconnect and fuel these intense public debates and criticisms.
So for you, the listener, maybe mull this over. This interview presents a view where the mayor is perceived as focusing on national political fights instead of tackling these massive local problems, the budget, crime, schools.
What does that dynamic, as shown in the source, tell you about the pressures and maybe the strategies involved in political leadership when a city is